Welcome back to Beyond the Bench, the podcast from Mountain State's Legal Foundation, where we explore the cases, people, and principles shaping the fight for liberty in America. And today, we are joined by the founder and principal of Multiple Use Advocacy, former president of Western Energy Alliance, MIT graduate, and U.S. Army veteran, Kathleen Sgamma. Kathleen, it's great to have you, and thank you for joining us for a conversation.
It's great to be here, Noah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, that was a checklist. You've had a wonderful, experienced life and still going, and wow. For those who may not know you, feel free to tell us who you are, even though I've kind of given a good little general introduction, what you do and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Well, I was at Western Energy Alliance for about 20 years. I wanted to get into policy work, so I networked into any kind of policy outfit in the Denver metro area for about 3 months, talked to exactly 126 people. I did keep track.
Wow, okay.
I was, doing a career change. I had been in the IT industry for about 11 years, and I wanted to get into policy work and eventually found Western Energy Alliance and started out as a policy analyst, government affairs analyst, and just learned everything I could about energy, public lands, natural resources, air and water quality, and then I took over the policy, and then I was president for since 2016.
Is that as big of a jump as you would, I guess, see it from IT to litigation, natural resources, policy? I mean, what was the relation? Was there a moment that kind of sparked the switch?
Well, I have a political science degree.
Oh, wow.
I did political science and defense and arms control studies at MIT. So I wanted to get back into policy work. I was an intel officer when I was in the Army. I was only in for about 3 years. Was deployed for the Persian Gulf War. And then after that war, President Clinton wanted to downsize the military, so I took an early out and lived in Europe for a little while.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Yes. Beauty of audio, no one sees if you cut it. People only see if you cut it on the camera, but that's the point of the camera. All right, so we'll take it from the top. Do question 2. So you started your career in the military and intelligence before entering energy and public lands policy. To build off of that, how did that early experience shape the way you think about national security, resources, and federal power?
You mean my experience in the military?
As well as intelligence. I guess, was there any relation or was there any inspiration behind those earlier career moves?
Really, I went into the Army because I had an ROTC scholarship, and Intel was interesting to me from a policy perspective. And so I did imagery intelligence. I was in Germany, stationed in Germany, then deployed to Saudi Arabia, and then back to Germany. And it was a good experience, not getting a desk job right out of college, so to speak.
Yeah, can't say I'm taking the same route right now. I just got out of college myself.
Oh,
so
congratulations.
Grad school. Yeah, I just finished at Florida State, and not necessarily a desk job. We're pretty active here. As you can see, we're behind a podcast, but it's a great time. And but it's definitely unique to go straight into the military, especially having that experience of ROTC and great discipline as well. So what first pulled you into, and kind of building off the last question, what first pulled you into land use and energy policy specifically?
Well, I did want to get into energy policy, and I just networked and found Western Energy Alliance. And then I didn't know anything about the oil and natural gas industry.
Really?
So I just had to learn it, and it's a fascinating industry.
Mm.
And I was kind of hooked shortly into it. So just learning about the industry, there's so many facets to it. Engineering, geology, you're working with a lot of smart people, learning about the industry. And then the issues that touch the wellhead are what Western Energy Alliance does. So the main issues are those public lands issues, because in the West, no matter how much we want to avoid any kind of federal land or minerals, because it takes so much more process you cannot really develop in the West without hitting some federal minerals at some point. Other than the Front Range of Colorado, pretty much any production area in the West involves some public lands. So you have to get into public lands issues, and air quality was another one that was big for the industry, or has been big for the last 20 years. Wildlife, Endangered Species Act issues, greater sage grouse, of course, but lots of other species. And it's funny how they always manage to find some small varietal or subspecies that happens to be in an oil and natural gas area, of course, since we know what the game is there, which is land control, not really species protection. So you just have to learn all those different issues if you want to be effective, and that was fun for me. I like policy and I like learning.
It truly is a game of chess, especially learning all the vocabulary and the different moves that you can make, what you can't make. Yeah, I mean, my young 4-month journey of working in law has been a hill to climb, to say the least. Just trying to get over the knowledge barrier, and especially working with very smart lawyers and very experienced attorneys and law employers as well.
Great.
But
great.
It's a great time, honestly.
Did you specifically look to get into natural resources?
So I've always been in marketing, surprisingly.
Oh, okay.
But I just like the fascinating. I like learning in the same way you do. I like just having something new to chat about and learn about and challenge myself. And I think this podcast has definitely been a great avenue. I don't learn like a typical person in a classroom. Simple conversations just like this between me and you, I honestly learn the most. And so I really enjoy this experience, and it's been a journey, but a good journey. So you spent nearly 20 years now leading Western Energy Alliance. What was that like?
It's a great organization.
Busy?
We represent the small independent producers. I mean, there are large companies that also are members, but we stay focused on small independent companies. So they're more scrappy. They're more, they don't have a lot of extra resources lying around that they can afford very onerous regulatory policy. So I took it upon myself to ensure that we were moving the needle on regulatory policy, public lands policy, every single day. So there are some trade associations that just kind of sit back and, they'll file some comments on this or that. But I like the small independents because they're aggressive and they're willing to go for it. So we were able to move the needle on a lot of different policy issues than with maybe a larger type of organization would be more hesitant to do so.
So you kind of spoke on these individual companies, producers, farmers, being a little bit more aggressive. Was there any experiences that stood out as, wow, like this is a bigger impact? I guess, and what I'm trying to say is, I mean, I come from small town Illinois. I've realized very early on that farmers are the backbone of this country, and the government tends to pick on them a little bit. It's just very impressive, and it's very hard. So was there any experiences or, I guess, conversations or interactions between maybe some clients or cases that you found super inspiring by any chance?
It's funny that you mentioned farmers, because farmers and oil and gas producers, kind of, people of the land who work out on the land in natural resources are indeed, they're the producers of the world, right? They produce something, and there's impact on the land, of course, but there are a whole lot of other scavengers out there who are trying to tell them how to do it or stop them from doing it. When you look at farmers, it's, you need to do this and you need to do it this way, from people who don't grow anything, or they don't grow anything themselves. They don't feed the world like
they don't
the American
produce.
farmers.
Yeah.
Same thing with energy. There are a lot of people who think, the government should determine the mix of energy, or the government should decide whether we can have an electric vehicle or an internal combustion engine vehicle. And Or, our energy mix needs to be more wind and solar. Well, that just doesn't work. It doesn't.
It's not that
work.
easy.
It's not that easy. There's a big difference between something that's reliable, like reliable electricity from coal or natural gas, and intermittent wind and solar that are not dispatchable when they need to be. So there are a lot of people telling farmers, there are a lot of people telling oil and gas producers what they should do, or you should do this kind of energy. But they're not the ones that actually power the economy. They're not the ones that actually feed the world. And so you're absolutely right. There's a lot of government interference, and sometimes it comes right down to harassment, really. There are people in the government who take it upon themselves to try to regulate things out of existence, whether that's farmers or producers or miners or whatever. So there is a lot in common.
Yeah, and I mean, especially now because you've transitioned towards multiple use advocacy, correct?
Well, that's just the name that I came up with for my company, but I'm pretty much doing the same types of policy issues that I was for Western Energy Alliance. I have some oil and gas clients, a helium client, engine manufacturers trying to get through EPA air quality regulations. I'm also working on the CRA, the Congressional Review Act for the land use plans, the BLM. Congress has overturned, I believe it's 4 now. There may be 6 at this point. I've lost track. Plans, Bureau of Land Management, resource management plans that have been overturned by Congress. And so working through with Congress and the administration on how to handle that situation. Because land use planning is a huge policy area, and it's not something that you can just turn on and off quickly. So Congress needs to be very mindful of the impact on that. So that's a pretty fun project for me.
Well, they say the wheels of justice turn slow, but when you're the government, you tend to have a lot of wrenches to throw into the the whole machine of justice.
Yeah, and that's what's so important about what we're seeing with the Supreme Court now. Some of these landmark cases have been extremely helpful to bringing back some sanity to the regulatory process. And I think we'll see the effects of some of these over time. I don't even think we've begun to see the impact of 7 counties, which Mountain States Legal Foundation did an amicus brief for Western Energy Alliance and the Forestry Foundation, American Forestry. Sorry, I can't remember the acronym, but we partnered with a forestry organization and support, and Mountain States did an amicus for us on that. So I think the impacts of that on environmental policy will be profound. The Supreme Court's ruling on West Virginia v. EPA and Loper-Bright, we'll see that all impact regulation here over time. And I think that's exciting because we become a nation where, it's hard to produce, it's hard to build, it's hard to put in roads, it's hard to put in pipelines and oil and gas wells, and, farmers get harassed, like you mentioned. So we need to get back to being a nation of built in America, where we can make it in America and not take 20 years to get through the process to the point that it just becomes harassment of the company. And then they're ultimately going to, in many cases, don't even do the project that they had proposed, and the people suffer from that.
Yeah, I agree. And especially what you're doing now is you're analyzing and assessing this so-called previous harassment and almost looking towards the future of how it can be harmful or how it can change the country in a direction that may not be so healthy, right? So especially right now, I mean, we can even talk about what you're doing with multiple use, and I guess the phrase multiple use, right, is a statutory mandate, but it's interpreted very differently today by very many people. From your perspective, how has that interpretation shifted, and why does it matter?
Well, the name of my company really just comes from the Bureau of Land Management's mandate. BLM, which is the primary public land manager I've dealt with over the last 20 years, has a multiple use mandate, as does the Forest Service, but most oil and natural gas is on BLM lands or lands managed by BLM. Certainly they manage the entire 700 million acres of federal mineral estate. So We have to deal with BLM quite a bit. And the multiple use is clear. In Federal Land Policy and Management Act, FLPMA, there are several principal uses: oil, natural gas, mining, timber, other mineral development, recreation, fish and wildlife development, and I'm probably, of course, grazing and ranching. Grazing. Those are specific principal multiple uses that are necessary so that we can tap into the natural resource wealth that we have as a country. If we were to listen to those who obstruct every one of those uses, every one of those uses except maybe fish and wildlife, but then again, they try to block access to hunting, so you could make the case for all of those multiple uses. For every one of those multiple uses, there are groups, obstructionist groups, that want to say we can't do that on multiple use lands. Now, there are, of course, national parks, wilderness areas, and those are set aside. Those are preservation only. We can't develop on those. But we have hundreds of millions of acres set aside in this country for preservation only. And we have also hundreds of millions of acres of working landscapes that are very appropriate for those multiple uses. And it's important that we have a regulatory structure where we actually are able to develop those natural resources, because it leads to the prosperity of our country. And the good news is we do those activities on a very, very small portion of public lands. So in the case of oil and natural gas, of the 700 million acres of federal mineral estate, we disturb about 0.07% of the land. Wow. So that's a pretty darn good balance.
Yeah.
for developing about a quarter of the nation's oil and natural gas. We disturb less than 0.1% of public lands.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Not many people do.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought you on. But it seems like you and our friend Ivan London do get along pretty well, because that's a lot of what we do here at Cape, which we just launched. But that's awesome to hear. So in press releases as well as in testimonies before the House Committee, you've highlighted that thousands of oil and gas leases have been delayed or tied up by litigation. What does that level of uncertainty mean in practical terms for producers and communities?
So since 2015, environmental groups have litigated pretty much every single federal lease sale. And Western Energy Alliance tried to intervene in almost all those cases. It's incredible, but we weren't even able to keep track of all the cases. So some did slip through the cracks.
So you're talking thousands, hundreds?
No, tens of cases, but,
okay.
There were a lot of cases, and we did even miss a few. But basically, we are in court, or have been in court, defending every single lease sold since 2015. There can be multiple cases on them.
Going on 10 years.
Yes. So that created a situation where some of those leases were canceled by activist judges, particularly in Idaho and Montana, ruling on leases in Wyoming, which seems very egregious, and there should be some sideboards put on around that. Mm-hmm. A judge in Idaho, where there's virtually no oil and natural gas development, should not have anything to say. A district court judge in Idaho should not have pretty much anything to say about leasing in Wyoming, the next state over. But that's a whole other issue. But what's resulted is that leases were tied up, drilling permits were held up, and companies, have had capital, billions of dollars in capital tied up in leases that they haven't been able to completely develop. We're seeing them starting to shake free. BLM just issued some corrective NEPA back in September. Judge Contreras in D.C. Ordered some corrective NEPA, mostly for greenhouse gas emissions. Some other judges have ordered corrective NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA analysis to be redone for leases in Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, Montana, and North Dakota, and New Mexico. So BLM is working through that corrective NEPA, but it has added years onto the process. And obviously, time is money. Years later, the American people don't have access to as much energy as they would otherwise. And, that leads to higher prices ultimately.
If you don't mind me asking, what, I guess, again, I'm pretty new to this law game, right? So when you enact something as NEPA, if I'm using that correctly, what does that do to a case or a lease, or, how does that make it harder specifically for BLM to then combat these for producers and farmers in the West?
Well, anytime the government does a project or there is a project done by a company on federal lands or with a strong nexus to the federal government, such as, oil and gas is a great example, mining is a great example, timber. The government has to do environmental analysis under NEPA, under the National Environmental Policy Act. And that is an analysis that is designed to identify impacts to the environment, including to the human environment, socioeconomic impacts, that is supposed to identify these impacts and inform the government so it can make a good decision. Often those impacts are mitigated. The project proponent will agree to different mitigation measures or avoidance of certain environmental impacts. But NEPA is a procedural statute designed to inform the government and provide better decision-making when it comes to projects that have an environmental impact. So anything that has that federal nexus has to go through the NEPA process. The problem is layers of legal precedent over decades have made the process take longer and longer and longer, and the litigation can drag on for years. Now, Congress has passed some measures recently in the Inflation Reduction Act, and then again in the One Big Beautiful Bill, that are designed to make NEPA take less time, be more focused on actual impacts, but it still remains a source of potential litigation, and it just takes a long time to get through that process. So Congress is also working on new legislation to improve the process of NEPA, because it affects not just oil and gas, but it affects wind and solar projects and many other different types of highway projects. And so it's cost the economy trillions of dollars over decades, just with the delayed infrastructure, additional costs to get projects done. So that's a constant struggle when you're trying to develop oil and natural gas on federal lands.
I agree, and especially when you talk about, even the average American, right? Some supporters say litigation ensures accountability, quote unquote. But while some critics may say it functions as a ban, right? So where do you see the balance breaking down?
Well, I think that balance is why Congress has both Democrats and Republicans, because obviously you can't get anything passed in Congress without that balance. Recognize that NEPA needs to take less time. Recognize that if we want to build it here in America, we need a more certain regulatory process that doesn't take years and years and years and add trillions onto the cost of projects over time. So I think Congress is working on that balance. Certainly the Trump administration is working to meet congressional mandates to make NEPA take less time. But it's again, early on, the Supreme Court has been helpful with the 7 counties decision as well. So hopefully we'll start to see some of that legal precedent get chipped away and more emphasis from the judiciary on, yep, Congress and legal precedent now, rulings from the Supreme Court has said, nope, we need to get this done. We don't need to fly spec every single NEPA document and say you didn't do this, this, and this, and this, and this. As long as it's reasonable and the government took a hard look at that project, then we're not going to use, we as a society are not going to use NEPA to take and make things take way too long. So I think we're trying to work on that balance in the United States. We still have very unhelpful, unproductive environmental groups that want to stop everything. They find an excuse to stop everything. But we need to start taking power away from those obstructionist groups and focusing on what Congress and the courts have said.
A lot of it comes down to understanding, right? I mean, I feel like at this point in I guess your role, especially you've advocated hundreds of times, both in front of big audiences, small audiences, in front of the House of as well, right? You've gone to like the Senate, the House.
I just was testifying before the Senate Banking Committee on Tuesday, and that was the 30th time I've testified before Congress. So, yes, I have done that many times.
What do you think is one of the biggest steps to making people change, helping them understand that this balance needs to be broken down, but it also needs to be understood, right? What do you think is one of those main elements that can contribute to that change or shifting that power away from the obstructionists?
Well, it's gotten ridiculous. We do, in America, we do something wrong for a long time until it just becomes too much. And then the pendulum swings back. So projects have just taken way too long, and many haven't even been implemented, and because of the long process. I think we're also seeing, certainly in the energy space, where there's a recognition that the United States needs to lead the world in AI. And if we don't, then if we lose that race to China, then our economy, our leadership in the world, our national security will certainly suffer. And so there is a recognition now, and we're starting to see some of the climate change edifice crumble because of the reality that's setting in on AI, data centers, the need for more energy. So there's reality setting in that intermittent sources of energy are added to the grid to some respect, but if you have too many on the grid, it becomes destabilized. So there's more of an appreciation for those reliable, affordable oil, natural gas, and coal when it comes to energy in the United States. So reality does eventually set in, and it's very helpful that the Trump administration is pushing back on that regulation, that President Trump understands how overregulation stymies economic development, kills jobs, kills our energy sources. And so I think the combination of that plus just general reality setting in on how much energy we need is starting to change, starting to tip that balance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand the concept that when you start, pioneering or engineering energy out of your own country, your gas goes down, the cost of building a house goes down, or buying a house, right, or running a business, and it's crucial. And I think a lot of it kind of goes back to press, to flashpoints, to media, and its emphasis towards the energy, I guess, quote unquote, industry, right? So you have the EPA climate and methane regulations, which have been a major flashpoint when it comes to managing energy and mineral resources. What concerns you most about how these rules are being used or expanded?
Again, I think the Trump administration is doing a good job of peeling back some of the overregulation. There's certainly the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act. There's bedrock environmental laws that, of course, we comply with. It's when agencies put on more and more process for less and less environmental impact that then that balance again is broken. So I think we're in a period right now where we have an administration that understands rolling back some of the over-regulation, but we're always willing and happy to comply with those bedrock environmental laws because we want to make sure we reduce our impact as well. We want to make sure that there's clean air, clean water, that we protect species. So we do all that gladly. It's the over-regulation that that I have been advocating against for quite some time.
Yes, I agree, and especially when you look at the previous administration, right? There's a lot of change from even just a couple months ago, right, until now. But there's, I guess, increasing. I can't even say talk, but more actual action of debanking what you kind of stated as the oil and gas industry, right? And so, do you see financial pressure becoming an extension of climate regulation?
Well, the Biden administration tried to do that. They tried to use every single financial regulator to defund the oil and natural gas industry.
So it's a thing already. It's already happening.
Well, but a lot of that regulation did not get finalized, and the Trump administration is unwinding that. And then again, the reality is setting in about how much energy we need for AI and data centers, et cetera. But we're also seeing reality come in on climate change. Climate change was a source, an excuse for overregulating everything during the Biden administration. And reality is really setting in about, well, yeah, climate change is a problem. We need to work on that. We need to innovate. We need to manage emissions. But it's certainly not a crisis. It's not an existential threat. It's a problem that needs to be handled by reducing emissions. But we're not going to quickly transition to some magical net zero world where we don't use any fossil fuels because we don't have an alternative that does everything that oil, natural gas, and coal do. Now, nuclear is just as disfavored by the environmentalists, as oil and gas. And again, that's switching as well because, heck, nuclear is non-carbon. It's non-carbon. It's completely non-carbon. So we should be using more nuclear. But try to get that permitted. The environmentalists don't really want anything. I think at some point they just don't want any human prosperity. They don't want human development.
I feel like we can have a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
Truly, like when you talk
That's
about the regulation and the use of nuclear towards energy and quote unquote prosperity in the United States, that's a whole nother box to get into. But if we were to talk about, I guess, the nitty gritty when it comes to you said coming to your senses or reality setting in. That's kind of what you said. So Congress recently used, and this is kind of what I was getting at, the Congressional Review Act to overturn what we stated earlier, the BLM land use plans, right? So an unusual move.
Yes.
And one in which you have urged Congress to, quote unquote, tread lightly. So for those who may not be familiar, let's break down the Congressional Review Act really quickly and then its history related to BLM.
So the Congressional Review Act was passed in 1996, I believe, and it gives Congress the power to overturn a major rule because of, it was done incorrectly or just the effects of it. It gives Congress some check on the administrative state because the federal government can just add more and more and more and more regulation. And Congress said, no, we need a check on that at some point. Congress has a overseeing function of the federal bureaucracy, and it's a way to trim back the administrative state, thankfully. Now, it hadn't really been used a lot until the first Trump administration. And then now it's been used with the trifecta of Republicans, House, Senate, and obviously the presidency. So it's hard to get anything overturned using the Congressional Review Act because not only does the House and the Senate have to pass it, but you have to have a president who's willing to sign it. So if you've got, the start of the Biden administration and there's no willing, well, that's a bad example. Let's let's just say if one or the other, if Republicans didn't control both houses of Congress, then none of this would have been overturned, because you pretty much need either such an egregious rule that there's bipartisan support for overturning it, and that did happen a couple of times with Senator Manchin in West Virginia. He was able to put some things over the limit, and we did get some things done during the Biden administration, but then Biden just vetoed it. So some rules were attempted to be overturned, but they were vetoed by the president.
Oh, wow.
So we had a situation where the Trump administration has used it, and there was a novel, and I forget who originally proposed it, but proposed that, a resource management plan is akin to a major rule. And a resource management plan is a years-long planning process that BLM does to determine how to manage a certain area of public lands. Which areas are available for grazing, leasing, which areas are closed off as critical environmental areas, that type of thing. And so they had never been considered a major rule subject to the Congressional Review Act until September of this year, when the first one was overturned. And so six plans have been overturned or will be overturned by the end of this year.
Wow. And I guess the bigger picture would be, why should people be concerned about the approach to overturn BLM land use plans? Like, how does it affect, I guess, the everyday, person just going to work?
Well, it's a bit of a stretch, the everyday, but ultimately, it's another straw on the camel's back, right? If these plans are too onerous and they cut off, in a couple cases, they cut off completely for the Powder River Basin in Wyoming and Montana, coal leasing. So the Biden administration completed a plan that would have eliminated coal leasing in one of the most productive coal regions in the world. So the Congress said, nope, we're going to overturn that plan. So that just took a pretty quick scalpel to those leasing moratorium for coal. And so that was a very clear direction from Congress that, nope, you can't do a plan BLM that just doesn't allow coal at all. So that was one example. The others are not quite as crisp and clear. The North Dakota plan had a coal leasing moratorium, as well as hundreds of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres shut to oil and gas leasing, which is what the North Dakota delegation objected to. So certain things they could object to in these plans, and they can overturn them, and then BLM has to go back to the drawing board and put in place a new plan that doesn't have that feature in it.
Going back to debanking. They're trying to debank the oil and energy.
Well, that's trying to regulate it out of existence.
Yeah.
Oil, gas, and coal. Yeah.
So I guess to move, I guess, into a different direction, you were recently nominated to lead the Bureau of Land Management as well in early 2025. What was going through your mind regarding the possible transition from advocate to agency leader?
Well, I believe I was nominated because of my demonstrated expertise and experience in BLM and public lands policies. I had a lot of support in the West from governors, members of Congress, county commissioners, other stakeholders who recognized that I understand public lands issues and that I would be able to lead an organization and balance those multiple uses, including balancing it with protecting the land. Of course, BLM has a mission to permit multiple uses, but also to protect the land and ensure that it's, air quality, ensure wildlife thrives, ensure, reduce invasive species, ensure that the land is managed well. So I was recognized for understanding that balance and my leadership on these issues over many years. Unfortunately, a memo I had written, or a message I had written to my members that was critical of President Trump on the 7th of January, 2021, was leaked about a day and a half before my hearing, my confirmation hearing before the Senate. And it kind of percolated up to the White House, and then I got asked to withdraw my nomination because of my being critical of President Trump. Now, what I said was not different than what any other Republican in Congress, short of maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene at the time, said at the time in being critical about President Trump's actions on January 6th. But it was leaked purposefully late, so I could not recover from it. So I was asked to withdraw my nomination. But, you know, that's just, I guess, how it goes.
That's it's the game nowadays, especially with media and news and all this. But nonetheless, I mean, to get the nomination is insanely impressive. I mean, you have to put in so many years and do so much work to even be thought of as a nomination, right? So what was kind of like, I guess, going through your head in that immediate moment from when you got the nomination? Like, were you kind of shocked? I don't know. I've never been nominated for a national level position.
No,
So
I wasn't shocked. I had thrown my hat into the ring.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Was it something that you kind of had your eye on from when you first stepped into, like,
No.
natural resources?
No.
No, not at all.
No.
Really?
No.
So going so far, I guess, up, quote unquote, the ladder, right? I mean, that is one of the biggest positions in the country.
Well, I was excited for it because I think I could have done a good job leading the agency. And, you know, I really was motivated to help President Trump unleash his, with his Unleashing American Energy agenda. But I was also very motivated to see if we can't make some progress in BLM on certain intractable issues like invasive species, like wild horse management. You know, you can't solve all these big problems in a few years, but, you know, make it better. You know, every time I go out hiking, I want to leave the land better than I found it, right? And I feel that as BLM director, I could have helped the agency, you know, make some progress on some of those issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a big picture. You know, there's a lot to be done, and especially because, I mean, now we look to the future, right? So looking ahead, what does a durable, legally stable public lands policy require, you know, regardless of who's in power?
Good land use planning is the key to, development or preservation on federal lands. It's identifying through a public open process which areas should be used for which uses, which areas should be set aside, how are we going to make sure we're protecting air, water, wildlife, the land itself. You know, it's that land use planning process, which is difficult. It takes lots of different policymakers and stakeholders working together to achieve that balance. But it's worth that effort. You know, it's worth that effort to protect the land and ensure that we can still develop the natural resources that we have as a country, because that's, natural resources are the basis. They're a foundation for a highly prosperous economy and a prosperous citizenry.
Mm-hmm. It's all right. We can take a little bit of break. It's all right. All the phones are going off right now. That's all right. It's the beauty of Hollywood magic. Again, nobody will see it. Nobody will really hear it. We just cut it out real quick. But I agree.
That was probably we were probably wrapping up anyway.
Yeah, that's literally perfectly timed. I had one more question for you,
Sure.
and then a little outro if you don't mind.
Sure.
But we can take it from the top whenever you're ready. If you just want to leave the phone down there, we can leave the phone down there.
No, I don't care.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. From the top. If you were to leave listeners with one question or one piece of advice, maybe a comment to think about from today's conversation, what would it be?
I guess I always go back to, and that's why I named my company Multiple Use Advocacy, is because I think there is a balance. There's a balance. There are trade-offs with everything. There's no perfect solution. There's no energy source that has no environmental impact. Wind and solar require lots of mining, and environmental groups don't want mining. So there's a balance between protecting the land and developing the resources that we need as citizens, for maintaining a healthy, prosperous life. And so we can achieve that balance. We can develop, we mitigate, we reduce our footprint on the land, we reduce those environmental impacts as much as possible, and we can do both. We can protect the land, and we can move forward and make it here in America.
I love it. Thank you so much. And Kathleen, thank you for joining us and for your wonderful insight on the ongoing fight to preserve our constitutional freedoms. Was there anything that you think we didn't talk about, or do you think people need to know about?
Probably more than enough right there. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Noah.
Yeah, thank you for coming out. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe and follow Beyond the Bench wherever you get your podcasts, and visit mslegal.org to learn more about how you can stand with us in defending the Constitution. My name is Noah Diaz-Masao, joined by the wonderful Kathleen Sgamma, and we will see you next time to go Beyond the Bench.